please put it in chat, or when there's a time, if Dr. Valdez wants to take a break and ask questions, or if you've got a burning one, then wave your hand and we'll go from there. But let's get started, and I'm going to turn this. This is Dr. Lourdes Valdez. She's spoken for us quite a few times, and it's always really helpful and interesting. So I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Pam. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm Lourdes Valdez. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work, I specialize in anxiety, and I primarily see children, but I also see pretty much everything. I see a little ADHD. I see.
Let me sit there and suck on that, please.
I see. Let's see, I see a lot of anxiety, of course. I see OCD. I run social skills groups for children. About 70% of my practice is children and adolescents, and about 30% is adults, because I really enjoy working with my grown-ups as well. I am in Katy. And right now I'm only doing telehealth. So it is, I hope to be able to evaluate the situation, and I'm really looking forward to the possibility of going back to my office in September. Once I feel comfortable going back to the office without masks is what I am hoping for. And, I am finding that the chat is a little distracting. I am wondering, would it be okay if I just stop for questions every once in a while?
That's fine.
I'm thinking that's going to be a little bit better for me.
Yes. It is kind of hard because I've got to check that and listen to you and then read it back. So yeah,
that's what I'm struggling with too. So I'm not going to look. I'm going to remove my chat and look. I'll just pause for questions. I think
okay.
That's probably my favorite way to do it. I'm also bilingual, so I speak Spanish and English. That's pretty much it. And I love giving these talks because it's kind of a fun way to give back to the community. But I also love. I used to teach, and I love teaching. So I really enjoy giving these talks. So it's nice to meet everybody. Let me first talk a little bit about the talk and the goals. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss how emotional intelligence and communication skills can come together to help us better give and receive feedback. So our goal after we finish this presentation is going to be to have some skills where we can give feedback in ways that maximize positive relationships and minimize anger and defensiveness. Before I start, let me first ask, how is the process of giving and receiving feedback for you? Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Welcomed? Dreaded? What is it like for people? And I guess you can just turn on your microphone if you want to share.
I think it depends on who you're getting it from.
Right.
And if you expect to get fussed at or picked on or whatever, then you're always a little leery. And sometimes it may be something helpful, but I think you're already kind of going, ooh, what are they going to say?
Right. Yeah, it's usually not something we're looking forward to. I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I see Chase has in here, it's easier to give than to receive. That's also very true.
Although I will tell you that I'm also going to talk a little bit about giving it here, and there's some things that you kind of want to keep in mind when you give it too. So, but we'll talk about both. So feedback is essential for everyone, both at work and at home. But even though it's important, it can be challenging to both give it and receive it. But we have to remember that everyone deserves a chance to improve. And how can they do it if they don't first know what improvements they need to make? It's also a useful tool for indicating when things are going in the right direction and or redirecting problem issues. In the workplace, giving and receiving feedback is probably the key to engaging with others and keeping on track if we are supervising. but it is a skill, and it, like all skills, it does take practice to get it right. I wanted to talk a little bit about people with ADHD. Um, so for people with ADHD, giving and taking feedback can be particularly challenging. Many of us grow up hearing a lot of criticism from parents, teachers, coaches, and often the feedback we get from others becomes our own self-talk, which means that we're often very hard on ourselves, and more critical of ourselves than anyone else can be. And there's also considerable evidence that people with ADHD have this enhanced sensitivity to any kind of unfavorable feedback. There's quite a bit of research, and this enhanced sensitivity is sometimes called rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now, this is not a DSM diagnosis. This is a way to describe this tendency to be a bit more sensitive to negative feedback. Why can't I move my slide forward? Oh, okay, here we go. So here's a little bit of rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's high sensitivity about the possibility of rejection, overly high standards for ourselves, feeling easily triggered towards guilt and shame, and isolating ourselves in a preemptive strike to not be rejected. Aggressive or just angry behavior towards people who have we perceive have slighted us. Frequently feeling kind of this uncomfortable physical reaction due to not fitting in or being misunderstood. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. Sometimes our self-esteem can be dependent on what others think. And just ruminating a lot about interactions, like we'll have an interaction with someone and then we'll ruminate about what we said and what we did. And, so because of the above reasons, many people with ADHD sometimes struggle with giving and taking feedback, as both can be kind of emotionally upsetting. Any questions or thoughts about this? And just turn on your microphone and share. It's hard for me to see everybody.
I'm Grayson Miller. I've been a family therapist for 25 years. Actually started with National Institute of Mental Health in the Decade of the Brain in 1990, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I have attention deficit disorder, and due to my research, I was a researcher, well, still am a research affiliate at National Institute of Mental Health. I discovered that I had autism. Okay. Which was reinforced in my internship when I had a group of 8 boys with autism, and I struggled down the hall to Dr. Dorothy Laurier, who was running Hope Center School, and said, "I think I have autism." So I'm finding in my 25 years of working primarily with attention deficit, which is so comorbid with autism, that it's about the person. If my client, my patient, has a history with someone like a mother or a father, that they can almost tell from the first 2 words out of their mouth in terms of feedback, whether it's going to be bad, and there's a sense of dread, and it's more heightened in autism, that the ears just close. I mean, I'd like you to talk to that.
No, I think I agree, because a lot of times, especially if we've had a parent that's super critical, it's almost like we're primed to expect the worst, because that's what we grew up with. So I would definitely agree with that.
And the one thing that I just, I'm a good friend for over 30 years with Pia Melody, who wrote the book Facing Codependence on Boundaries. And I really think it's important for for people with ADHD and autism and who are overly sensitive people to have boundaries. I'm criticized for a lot of things, and I have to consider the source.
Absolutely.
And when you do that, you have to say, do I respect this person? But it also, when you have boundaries and it's a child and a parent, what can happen is if you teach the child boundaries, the child is able to listen to that and not go into this closed ear format, of here we go again.
Right, I agree. So I agree with you. We're gonna keep moving. I have a lot, it's kind of a big presentation. I may have to skip through some things, but I do have a lot to share, but I agree with you. There certainly seems to be a priming effect. So I want to talk with you a little bit about, let me see, I have to do it with the mouse, I've learned. We're going to talk a little bit about some emotional intelligence factors that are related to giving and getting feedback. Emotional intelligence involves the ability to understand and manage emotions. And some experts believe that emotional intelligence might be even more important than IQ. And I would agree with them. So psychologist Daniel Goleman is the person that is most known for developing a definition to emotional intelligence. And oops, here we go. According to Daniel Goleman, there are 5 components to emotional intelligence. And these are it. We're going to go over each one. So the first one is self-awareness. And that involves the ability to recognize and understand our own emotions and to be aware of their effects on our actions and our moods, our emotions, and on the emotions of others. So for example, recognizing and feeling different emotions, being able to label them. I feel sad right now. Recognizing how different emotions affect our behavior. Okay, I know when I feel sad, I tend to isolate myself, right? And also recognizing how my mood and my behavior impact my interactions with others. So, well, I notice that when I feel sad and isolate myself, others react by keeping their distance. And that leaves me even sadder and lonelier. So that's what that self-awareness is. Then the second part is self-regulation, which is the ability to regulate and manage our emotions. This doesn't mean putting emotions on lockdown and hiding our true feelings. What it means is waiting for the right time and the right place and the right avenue to express our emotions, because emotional expression is really important to do. We don't want to lock down our feelings. So self-regulation is all about expressing our emotions appropriately. So for example, my boss just told me that I'm not bringing in enough sales and that has to improve. And I feel really angry because I've been trying really hard and worried about what this means for my job. But, I know that I can get upset here. If I get upset here at work, that's not going to make my situation better. So I'm going to focus hard on my work for now. And then I'm going to get home and I'm going to call my best friend and I'm going to vent and maybe even have a good cry. So that's an example of good self-regulation. The next part of emotional intelligence and social skills. And this is our ability to interact well with others and connect in positive ways. So listening well, assertiveness, leadership skills, things like that. The next one is empathy, the ability to understand how others are feeling. And this is more than just being able to recognize the emotional states of others, but involves our response to others based on kind of how we feel that somebody else might be feeling. So if we sense that someone's feeling sad or hopeless, we're going to treat them with extra care. And being empathic also allows people to understand the power dynamics that influence social situations. The next one is motivation, the ability to be motivated by our inner needs and goals and not by external rewards like fame or money or recognition. It's that personal drive to achieve, the desire to improve and meet certain standards, a commitment to personal or organizational goals, taking initiative, being ready to act on things, and being optimistic, having that ability to keep going and pursue goals. in the face of setbacks. Can anyone think about how these components of emotional intelligence can affect how we give and receive feedback? Well, I'll just give I suspect you all know, but it's empathy. If we're giving feedback, having empathy with the person who's receiving it and saying it in a way that they can hear it. If we're getting feedback, being aware of what feelings we're experiencing and regulating them so that we express them when it's appropriate. So they're all fairly important. Any questions or thoughts about emotional intelligence?
I've been working with developing what I call a theory of mind emulator for my well, actually for myself primarily, but also for my clients and patients in the hospital. That folks on the autism spectrum don't pick up a lot of social cues. They don't pick up 70% of meta communication. And I'm really interested in what you have to say about how we can use that emotional intelligence, which I use a lot with my clients' patients, and how we can overcome the problem of that lack of a theory of mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you know what I'm going to be doing, which might actually be helpful. I think for people on the spectrum, it's helpful to say, here are the steps, and that's what I'm going to do. And I hope that is helpful. But that's how I hope to do it. But yeah, we'll talk a little more about how each of these can impact our giving and as well as our receiving feedback. Or any other thoughts about emotional intelligence? No?
I know that. Hi, I'm Reed. This is my
Reed.
first time. I know that if I receive criticism and that is upsetting, it is very difficult for me to receive that criticism in a productive way because I'm too distracted by my feelings about it and my projections of like, what does this mean about me and what they think about me that they are giving me this criticism, even if none of that is actually happening. Like if I'm assuming that they might feel upset at me,
Yes.
and then ruminate about that when that might not even be true. But while I'm distracted by all of that, I might not be able to concentrate on actually like accepting the criticism.
I think I think that's really common. And I think it's because, and we're gonna talk about this, humans have what's called a negative bias. And when we when we experience different things, we tend to fixate on the negative. And that comes from, well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. You're kind of getting ahead of me here, because I'm going to talk about a negative bias. But I do think we tend to fixate on the negative, and then we don't hear the positive. So I absolutely agree. So I'm going to move forward, and we're going to talk a little bit about fixed mindset and growth mindset. Something that is pretty prevalent in the literature as well as pop culture today. And it is, to what extent do we believe that skills are fixed? Like we're born either good at sports or good at math, or they're learned. And that's basically what fixed growth and a fixed mindset is. So mindsets are these underlying beliefs that people have about learning, abilities, and intelligence. And when people believe that they can get better at any ability, they understand that effort makes a difference, and it makes them stronger. And so they're going to put in the extra time that leads to higher achievement. And people with growth mindsets see failure as either a chance to learn to grow, or some way to do better next time. But when people believe their abilities are fixed, You're either smart or you're not. You're either athletic or you're not. They're less likely to work on them. And so abilities don't grow, and they see failure. For them, it's really easy to see failure as permanent, and it can be devastating, and it makes it really, really hard to hear feedback. Do I have time, Pam, to show a video on growth mindset? Or are people pretty familiar with growth mindset and we can move forward? Oh, Pam, your microphone is off.
I was going to say, go ahead, because even if I have to log off at 8:20, y'all continue. What I was going to say, just because it's more about kids, and I didn't know if you were adjusted, somebody said that their child doesn't seem to have much self-awareness or regulation, and how can we instill that? And I think a lot of that gets back to, that they're so typically up to 30% behind their peers, I'm guessing, but I didn't know if you were going to address that along the way.
I will. It's 2 slides
Okay.
from now.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So I'm going to show you this video, and it's a video on what growth mindset is, and it talks about what feedback means. Feedback means different things depending on whether you have a fixed or a growth mindset.
If you operate in the world of sports or education, you've most likely heard of the term growth mindset. It's a concept that's sweeping the world and changing and improving the way that people learn. This powerful idea has been pushed forward by Stanford professor and best-selling author Carol Dweck.
For decades, I've been studying why some people succeed while people who are equally talented do not. And over the years, I've discovered that people's mindsets play a crucial role in this process.
These mindsets are really important when it comes to learning. Her work has uncovered 2 ways of thinking about skill and development. Some people have what's called a fixed mindset. They believe that skills and intelligence are set, and you either have them or you don't. That some people are just naturally good at things while others are not. In short, they believe that you are not in control of your abilities. Other people have what's called a growth mindset, and they believe that skills and intelligence are grown and developed. So people who are good at something are good because they built that ability, and people who aren't are not good because they haven't done the work. In short, they believe that you are in control of your abilities. Really, the core idea here is people with a fixed mindset believe that skills are born. People with a growth mindset believe that skills are built. People with a fixed mindset believe that you can't or don't have to learn and grow. And people with a growth mindset do believe in their capacity to learn and grow. Dweck's work shows that mindsets have a major influence on people's ability to learn, and that people who utilize this growth mindset tend to learn, grow, and achieve more over time than people with a fixed. Growth mindset really creates a solid foundation for great learning. And because of its power, companies, sports teams, and schools from all over the world are implementing this into their culture. Over the years, we've worked with a ton of amazing groups to help instill this within their culture. We're talking Fortune 500 companies, lots of colleges, lots of high schools, and even a few prisons who are working to build growth mindset into their reentry program. What I'm trying to say is this is bigger than one study or one test.
Yeah, I'm going to scoot up. I'm going to scoot up a little bit.
Born, and therefore they can't or don't have to learn. People with a growth mindset believe that skills are built, therefore they can learn. The second major characteristic is focus. People in a fixed mindset tend to focus on performance and outcomes and results. In other words, their main focus, their main concern becomes how they look, and more specifically, to not look bad. People with a growth mindset tend to focus more on the process of getting better, of learning and growing. These mindsets and these characteristics have a huge influence on our ability to learn. And now we start to see why. Let's look at like the 4 key ingredients to growth: effort, challenges, mistakes, and feedback. The research shows that when somebody is in a fixed mindset, they look at effort as a negative thing, as something that you do when you're not good enough. They also don't see the value or purpose of putting in effort. They've been shown to back down and avoid challenging situations. They get really discouraged and worked up when they make mistakes. And when somebody with a fixed mindset receives feedback from a parent, a teacher, a coach, or a friend, they get defensive, they take it personally, and they don't see the value or purpose of the feedback. So, in other words, people with this fixed mindset actually avoid and shy away from these 4 key ingredients to growth. Dweck and her team have shown that when people enter a growth mindset, they look at effort as a useful thing, as an important part of the learning process. They're actually more likely to embrace challenges and persevere and work through them. They see mistakes as learning opportunities, and when they receive feedback, they actually appreciate it and use it. Now, the fascinating and important part of this table is to connect the dots between these key characteristics of the 2 mindsets and our actions and behaviors towards learning. Let's look at the fixed mindset side first. They actually shy away from putting in effort because they don't believe that they can change. They give up when they're met with a challenge and things get hard because they don't want to look bad. So in their mind, the challenge becomes a threat, and because they don't believe that they can change. They hate making mistakes and are discouraged by mistakes because if you're making mistakes, you're not looking good. And they don't see the value or purpose of feedback because they don't believe in their capacity to grow. So, in one way or the other, every single one of these actions is a byproduct of these characteristics. And the same is true on the growth mindset side. They see the value and purpose of effort because they believe in their capacity to grow. They're more likely to take on a challenge and persevere through it because they believe that they can grow and because they're focused on the opportunity to do that. So, they frame a challenge as an opportunity to get better. And by focusing on the process and believing in their capacity to grow, they're more likely to understand how important mistakes are in this process. And when they receive feedback from a parent, teacher, coach, or friend, they're more receptive to this because their focus is on getting better and because they believe that that information can help them grow and they have the capacity to do so. 2 key points with this table. First, you're not just one or the other. This is a spectrum. And in different times, on different days, in different situations, you might be in a growth, while other times you'll slip into a fix. But now that we understand how it works and we understand the characteristics, you can start to identify where you're at on the spectrum and, more specifically, the cause of that mindset. Is it our beliefs or is it our focus? Second, yes, these actions of learning are great, and they're definitely behaviors that we want. But we have to understand that they come from our mindsets. So to create a great culture for learning, it's about zooming in on beliefs and focus and creating a real growth mindset.
I'm going to stop because I want to move forward. But it does a very good job talking about how our mindset affects how we receive feedback, as we can see. So now the other thing I want to tell you is that recent advances in neuroscience have shown that the brain is by far a lot more malleable than we ever knew. And research on neuroplasticity, or what's called brain plasticity, has shown how connectivity between neurons can change with experience. And with practice, neural networks grow new connections, strengthen existing ones, and build insulation that speeds transmissions between of impulses, basically. So these neuroscientific discoveries have shown us that we can increase our neural growth by the actions we take, such as using good strategies, asking questions, practicing and following good nutrition. And so what that tells us is that not only is a growth mindset helpful, but it's actually true. Like there's plenty of evidence that that growth mindset is actually the way things work. So that's an important thing to know. Now, this brings us to the question that we talked about earlier. How do we help children? How do we instill a growth mindset in children? Well, interestingly, the kind of feedback that we give others seems to shape whether people have a fixed or a growth mindset. So for example, Carol Dweck, who's this researcher that they interviewed, she found that telling children that they're smart or that they're good at math actually encourages a fixed mindset. While praising, man, you're really working hard at that, or look at that, you worked really hard on that project and look how amazing it turned out. So focusing on things that children have control over is actually the way to help children develop a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed one. So praising hard work and effort as opposed to what you're just really smart is a lot more helpful in helping children develop a growth mindset and being more open to feedback. Any questions so far or thoughts? Okay, I'm going to touch a little bit on power dynamics, which, understanding power dynamics is being able to have a sense of who possesses power in different relationships, whether they're in a family or in an organization. Understanding how these different differences influence feelings and behaviors, interpreting situations that hinge on those dynamics. The easiest way to think of power dynamics in relationships is to think about how actions tend to move us one up in relationships to one another or one down. For example, oftentimes giving someone feedback or drawing attention to a problem moves us one up and defines us as more powerful. So that's an example. At least that's how it feels to the person receiving the feedback. No one likes to feel less powerful. If you don't want to be making an inadvertent power play, we have to develop a different relationship before we try to give feedback. If we want to give people feedback, we have to ensure that we are really good and really persistent asking it from them. So we have to make sure that we respond to the feedback we get with appreciation and thoughtfulness. So for example, one of the things that I do with my clients in my office is I often ask them, how am I doing? Is what I'm doing helpful? I'm always asking for feedback because I also spend my time giving them feedback. So I do a lot of work to make the relationship one where we can give each other feedback, and that is something that we do easily. Now we also need to remember that all humans have a negativity bias, and that is what Reed was talking about. And there's a little video on this. I promise you this one's much shorter, but almost everyone remembers negative things more strongly and in more detail. And our brains have evolved separate and more sensitive brain circuits to handle negative information and events and process the bad stuff more thoroughly than the positive things. So that means that receiving criticism is always going to have a greater impact on us than receiving praise. So let me show you this video.
We're really focused on searching out weaknesses and fixing them. And it's not only because we operate on a disease model, but humans actually have something called a negativity bias. I know it sounds crazy. It basically means the bad things in life hold more weight for us than the good things, and we seek them out. Why? Well, evolution, really. When we were cave people, our negativity bias saved us. Take my this old dude. Ooh, ah. Ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ah. As we evolved, our negativity bias became almost second nature for our survival. But in modern society, this bias has other consequences. Think about our relationships. Sometimes we glaze over the good stuff, like at work. Got your evaluation here. Looks like you're doing a great job. You're a diligent worker. Clients love you. One thing I think you can improve upon is your punctuality, but as I said, you're doing a great job overall. We tend to focus on the one negative aspect, overlooking all the positive things that are said. This consequence of negativity bias is especially important in our relationships with our family.
Mom, I got my report card. I got an A in math and science.
You got a C in history? Oh, your father's gonna be so disappointed.
This negativity bias affects us in most domains. Scientists show us that the psychological weight of negative to positive events in our mind is 3 to 1. That means for every negative thing we notice, we need 3 positive things to counteract it. By the way, in relationships, that ratio is closer to 5 to 1.
Oops, no, don't go back. Okay. I want to go on to the next one. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, complaints, or feedback?
Bailey.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about giving feedback, and then we're going to talk a little bit about receiving feedback. So this is kind of more the meat of our talk. So giving,
Sorry.
say something.
Yeah, I think I have a question about. Hi, I'm Donna. I might have to jump off a little early, so if I disappear, that's why. But I didn't want to be rude. But actually, I had a question back on the last one thing that we talked about the power in the relationship, and what you were saying about how you always have to look at your own faults and what you're doing wrong, and ask for feedback. Sometimes I feel like my whole issue is with my sister, and she's the powerful one in the relationship, and I feel like when I say, oh yes, I've got these faults and I've got this wrong, I feel like she loses some respect for me. I feel like she sees me as weak, and when I admit my weakness, because I'm all about admitting my weakness, I'm not perfect, and she's all about admitting her strengths. She is. So I feel like whenever I admit my weakness, she just is like, yep, it just reinforces. I'm the strong one, you're the weak one, and she loses respect for me. What do you think about that?
My thought is that there's something else going on there. There's a whole personality issue going on there, in addition to the sharing or giving feedback. I mean, she sounds that like she is someone that it's not easy to, she may not be someone that we easily want to share our weaknesses with, because she doesn't, we share our weaknesses to be one with other people, to be at the same level as other people, but that sounds like what you're saying is that doesn't work very well with her. But if you were talking to someone who's very empathic and who's a close friend, and you share something like, oh, I'm so frustrated that I always get distracted when I'm doing my work, that they might have a very compassionate response and say, oh, I hear you. That is so frustrating. I'm so sorry that happens. So I think it depends on the relationship with the person, and you may have, you and your sister may have a whole pattern, a little dance that you've been doing for so long that it might be hard to get out of that situation, that kind of pattern is probably, but I think you're bringing up the point that personalities are also an important component of giving and getting feedback, and being aware of how someone might take something, having that ability to put ourselves in the other person's perspective is also important in how we might want to give feedback.
So do you always say, yes, these are my faults, and yes, this is my issue, and or do you ever say, look, I'm strong, I'm doing the best I can here, and I'm this, do you ever stand up for yourself?
Absolutely. And yeah, Yeah, definitely. You have to stand up for yourself. And when you were saying is I'm doing my best, that's more of a growth mindset thing rather than, I can't do this. And that is definitely the healthier way to go. But that's a really good point. And I think personalities definitely play an impact, play a role on how feedback is taken and received. So I'm going to keep going. But we're going to kind of come back to that and whether we trust the person that we're receiving feedback from, because that's what you're talking about. We're going to get to that. So giving feedback, we want to first be disciplined about what is worthy feedback. If we can't think of constructive purpose for giving feedback, we don't really want to give it. So there's right and wrong reasons to give feedback. And so right reasons might include commitment or concern for the other person, a sense of responsibility. We want to guide or mentor someone, to support someone, to enhance someone. And then, of course, there's wrong reasons to give feedback. Defend or excuse our own behavior, exert revenge, demoralize or condemn. We're in a bad mood, to appease the third party, or to make ourselves seem powerful or superior. William Hamilton has a question. I can actually see a hand going up. William, do you have a question or a thought?
Yes, we're trying to determine, like, what is the difference between being realistic or giving realistic information versus what could be considered as negative feedback. Sometimes it feels like we're trying to give him an honest assessment of some of his behavior, but oftentimes he takes that as just criticism. So we're trying to figure out how do you do that in a way that can be well received, especially when he has challenges receiving social cues.
Yes, and the way we do that is through a feedback sandwich, and we're gonna get to that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So it's important. So that is one thing. We want to make sure that the feedback that we're giving is worthy, and then we also want to make sure that the feedback provider is credible and trusted by the feedback recipient. And that's what Donna was talking about. We may not always trust that person. And so it's important that when we're giving feedback that we know that we're trusted by the person who's going to receive feedback. We want to pick our moment because timing is pretty important with feedback. We want to give feedback frequently, and that way nothing said during formal feedback sessions should be unexpected. This is more like at work or surprising. We want to be timely. The closer to the event we address the issue, the better. And the feedback needs to come. It shouldn't be surprising. It needs to come at a time that people can use it. And if the situation involved is highly emotional, we should wait until everyone has calmed down before we engage in feedback. So for example, with kids, William, you were asking about this, I often, if the child is really, really upset, I don't give feedback when they're really upset. I wait until they're calm and then I give the feedback, because when you're upset, you're just not thinking straight. So we want to wait until the person is calm, until the emotional reactivity has calmed down. And then we want to give negative feedback in private. That is respectful and kind. I mean, public recognition is always appreciated, but public scrutiny is not. So we want to establish a safe place to talk and a place that we won't be interrupted or overhead. We want to focus on description of behavior rather than judgment of personality. So remember that we're making no comment on what type of person they are or what we believe or value. We're only commenting on how they behaved. We want to allow the person to focus on what we're saying rather than feeling personally confronted. We want to focus on what the person did and its effect on us. Presenting feedback as our opinion makes it much easier for the recipient to hear it and accept it, even if we're giving negative feedback. And this makes it a blame-free way of giving feedback. And there's something about saying how the behavior has impacted us personally that makes us somewhat vulnerable, and that in turn helps them receive and hear it better. So we do that by using I statements, give the feedback from our perspective. So saying, I was angry and hurt when you criticized my report in front of my boss, rather than you were insensitive yesterday. We want to give the person an opportunity to respond and give their perspective. What do you think? What's your view of the situation? What are your reactions to this? Tell me what are your thoughts? Is this a fair representation of what happened? And we want to limit our focus. We be aware of feedback overload. A feedback session should discuss no more than one thing, maybe two issues, but really one. Stanford professor Nass has said that most people can take in only one critical comment at a time. Any more than that, and we risk that the person's going to feel attacked and demoralized. So if we overload somebody with too much feedback that's negative, they're going to become, they're going to be turned off. Or if we give them too many things, they're going to become confused about what really needs to be improved first. We want to try to end on a high note. Oh, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the sandwich method, and that's what we were talking about. So we want to say something positive, then noting something that needs to be improved, and then we say something else positive again. People are more likely to work on correcting a deficiency if they feel good about their performance overall. That is, if their little deficiency seems like a single blemish against an otherwise reasonably clean background. And we want to praise strengths and then give one or two suggestions on how to make it better. So, you are such a great kid to parent. You are kind and you're empathic. But, sometimes I've noticed that you kind of impulsively take things from your brother without even realizing that you're doing it. And, I know what a great kid you are, and I know you don't mean to do that, but I want to make you aware that sometimes that happens. So, I love it when you are able to really be aware that your brother has this thing and he really needs it right now. So kind of putting it in this little sandwich can help. And you end it on a good note. So you always approach things in a positive and optimistic way. You never complain. You let the other person save face. And then you want to allow enough time for a response and behavior to your feedback. So, another example, so we now understand, this is kind of the way we might end it. Okay, so we now understand each other better. I'll do what I can to make sure your priorities are factored into the schedule, and I'll expect you to come straight to me if the schedule's a problem. You really follow through on some tough problems. Keep taking the initiative. So you end up doing it, and you summarize and you do it in a positive way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I will definitely try it out. Hopefully he doesn't become immune to it.
Feedback sandwich, it really helps. Any other thoughts or questions on this?
I've been using the criticism sandwich ever since I was in training as a family therapist 30 years ago. And it works. It really works, because you want to build up your kid, okay? But you want to kind of help sand off the rough spots.
Right. No, I agree with Grayson. I mean, it's really the way to go, because I have found, because I'm a parent too, and I have found that it's really the only way to get kids to really hear what you have to say, really hear you. You got to talk about the positive too, especially if your kid has ADHD and they already expect that negative feedback, right? So it's important for these kiddos to get that positive feedback. So yeah, I agree. It sounds like Grayson, you are the family therapist here, and it sounds like you have found that helpful too. So that is good to hear. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, I'm going to keep going then. And so now we're going to talk about taking feedback. And the first thing we have to remember is that feedback is kind of like a present, not a tennis ball. With a tennis ball, we want to throw it back as soon as possible. With a gift, we say thank you and we accept it, whether we like it or not. And once we consider it, we may decide to keep it, or we may decide to return it and not use it. But if our initial response is to listen and to thank the giver, that is a good start. So, taking feedback. First thing is we want to cultivate that growth mindset and ask for feedback often from folks we truly trust, Donna, from folks we truly trust. Like I said, in my sessions with my clients, you know, there's times that I do something and I know that my client, you know, if I confront somebody, I will often say at the end, so how are we doing? How are you and I doing? Because that connection is so important with our clients, and I want to get feedback. But other ways of asking for feedback: what can I do to make your job easier? If you had to make a couple of suggestions for improving my work, what would they be? So asking people for feedback, you know, it helps. So that feedback becomes less of a surprise when we get it. So we want to, sometimes it helps to prepare some open-ended questions for those who know us well and can speak with confidence about our work. So let's talk about what to consider when we're receiving feedback. Consider the feedback we've been given as if we've discovered it ourselves. That is, so if somebody gives us feedback, you know, we want to take away that defensiveness, that negative bias, that negativity, by considering the feedback as if we've discovered it ourselves. And this is hard to do, but it helps prevent our ego from drowning out good advice. We may decide after careful deliberation that it was inaccurate or no good, and that's fair enough. But it's important to silence our ego long enough to seriously consider what we've heard. And the best way that I know how to do that is to kind of pretend that I came up with that and really try to consider it. We want to be careful of that negativity bias, right? Don't take the negative feedback personally. We don't want to blow specific negative feedback out of proportion and allow ourselves to believe that everything we do is bad, especially if we're having a tough day. Always thank the person, even if we don't agree with it. So that they see that we've understood, even if we don't agree right now. This doesn't mean we need to act on it, but we do need to consider the feedback and decide how, if at all, we actually want to use it. We want to see if we can use the feedback as a learning experience. We all make mistakes all the time. It's human nature. And no matter what kind of criticism is aimed at us, we do want to see it if we can find something that we can learn from it. Sometimes the giver of feedback waits until he or she is upset before saying anything, and then has way too much to say. I mean, we've all been in the situation that instead of somebody telling us something, like as soon as they notice it, you know, they wait until they're like really, really upset. And then they have way too much to say. And when that happens, you know, we want to ask for time to reflect on what we've heard, one element at a time. And it's okay to say, in fact, it's even preferable to say when we need to take a break and negotiate a time to return to the conversation. Let me think about this. I'm willing to hear more criticism, but not all at once. You know, and I've been in situations where someone has criticized me and I have said, you know what, we're both upset. Why don't we both take a break and come back in about an hour and let's talk about it some more, especially if the giver of the feedback is upset. Consider asking questions and signal that, actually, there we go. Ask questions to signal that we've understood what they've said and reflect thoroughly on what we've heard. So saying something like, you know, I hear the fact that sometimes I don't respond to your text for several days. is what leaves you behind, leaves you feeling that I'm not committed. So being able to say that is better than getting into an argument about whether or not you're committed. So when you said, blank, would it be fair to say that you meant blank and you felt blank? Have I understood you correctly when I did blank and you felt that when I did blank, you said you felt blank? So asking questions, seeking clarification when we're getting feedback lets the feedback giver know that we're hearing them. And again, whether we choose to take the feedback or not, that's our prerogative, but listening and reflecting is important. And it's important that our reflection and our questions focus on behavior and not personality. Even if the feedback has been given at another level, we can always return the conversation to the behavioral and help the person giving feedback to focus on that level. So if they go on about our personality and saying, we're lazy, we might want to then be calm enough, have the self-regulation to be calm enough at that time and say, so are you thinking that I'm not performing, I'm not putting out enough product, or I'm not putting enough work? Is that your concern? So trying to bringing it back to the behavior. Let me see. Okay. Then when receiving feedback, it might be tempting to become defensive and explain away the criticism. Instead, just let the person finish completely. And we want to try to listen deeply. We want to avoid justifying, explaining, making the other person wrong. Remember that feedback is data, and having that data is better than not having it, because it expands our choices and returns us, and it results in healthier relationships. Sometimes the best initial response upon hearing negative feedback is just silence. And that's especially true if it is a situation of, with a big power differential. Just being silent is often the smartest thing that we can do in that situation.
It's almost disarming if you sit there and take notes and actually ask questions and make sure that you're getting what they're saying right. All of a sudden it becomes a very two-way conversation, and they say their impression is, and it's true, is this person really wants to hear that feedback and work on it.
Absolutely. Yep, that's an excellent point. It changes the dynamic, doesn't it? It makes it can change the power dynamic. It changes the whole interaction. Instead of this person telling you, this is what you're doing, this is what you need to do differently, you're there asking questions. And I think that actually brings you one up. So it changes the power differential. You're absolutely right. So emotional intelligence is essential here. We need to be aware of our emotions. So that's self-awareness, and also be able to manage our emotions. So that's self-control, so that even if the feedback causes an emotional response, we can control it. So we want to practice self-awareness and self-regulation. We don't want to react to the initial sting of the feedback. We have to remember it's going to fade. It's going to fade. Also, if we know the person who is critical, if we know a person who is critical of everything, we want to try not to take their comments too seriously. And this goes back to Donna's sister, who sounds like she can be very critical, because this is part of their personality. So we want to keep in mind what someone's personality is like when we are taking feedback from them, so that we don't take it personally. If we feel that we might, I remember talking about, with clients who have really, really difficult bosses. Sometimes I use a strategy of imagining this person as a robot, and they're just kind of programmed to do this, and this is what they're going to do, and they're predictable, and you need to know that to cope with it. So keeping aware of their personality. If we feel that we may lose self-control, or we might say or do something that is potentially damaged, we have to walk away. If we're in a meeting at work, politely excuse ourselves and leave the room until we have had more time to gather ourselves. Even though somebody's negative remarks may hurt, it is more harmful for us to allow that criticism to be destructive to our own confidence. So if we can't deal with it calmly, just walk away. What if we don't trust the feedback giver? Because I think sometimes we don't. What if we don't trust that person? Well, it's still present. We want to consider it. We can choose to ignore it if after considering it, we know it's not trustworthy, or worse, it's malicious. Because, I don't know about you all, but I've been in work situations where someone gives you malicious feedback. And we have to be careful. We have to know where they're coming from. That's why that being able to put ourselves in somebody's spot, being able to see what their intentions might be is important, because sometimes people do give malicious feedback. And if we have to take or use the feedback, we can consider telling a supervisor that we don't think it's a good idea, and then document if it's someone that we don't trust. So any thoughts about receiving feedback?
I do.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey, Miss Val, you bring up some really good points. I'm in Toastmasters, and we have one of these techniques where we give feedback. It's called best, better, best. No, wait a minute. Best, better. What you did good, what we think you could do better, and then what you did best. So good, better, best. Okay. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you. This is very, very helpful.
That Teresa, that sounds like a feedback sandwich, doesn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Here's what you did good. Here's what you could do better, and here's what you're best at.
Yep.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah, that's cool. Any other thoughts about receiving feedback?
So you're getting feedback, and I think I hear you saying that you're just supposed to take it. You're just supposed to, reflect. Okay, I hear you saying this, I hear you saying that, and not defend yourself, not just take it and not give them feedback. Right?
You can give them feedback, but sometimes it's better. Again, it depends on the power differential. Because if this person is your boss.
Right. If it's your boss, you don't give them feedback.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Again, my sister, I'm just supposed to just listen to her tell me everything that's wrong with me and just say, okay.
I would not say that. I would not say that, because that's a different situation. I would say, okay, I'm hearing you, I'm listening to you, and here's what I think. So no, it depends on the differential. This is more like listening to your boss give you feedback. But I think if it's your sister, I think you should listen to it. It's a present, and say, I hear you, and I clarify. And then if you're calm, you can say, and here's my thought, and then talk, focusing on the behavior, not on the personality, and say, here's what I think, and doing it in a positive feedback sandwich kind of way, and modeling giving feedback in a kind way will help probably feel good about yourself when you're having interactions with a difficult person. But I think if it's your boss giving you feedback, it is better to be quiet and listen, reflect, ask questions, thank them, and move forward. But you know what? Even with difficult people, sometimes that can be very disarming. Like Grayson was saying, I hear you. So you're thinking this. So you're thinking that my jewelry is ugly. Tell me about that. Tell me about how my jewelry is off. Tell me a little bit more. There's something very disarming and very, it kind of changes the dynamic of the situation. In fact, I work with a lot of kids who get teased. I work with a lot of kids who to manage teasing. And one of the things you do is you say, really, tell me about that. Thanks for sharing. And then you leave it alone. So sometimes it's okay, although sometimes you can get feedback. It depends on the relationship. Does that make sense?
I just got off a phone call with my brother, who is very judgmental, very fixed. And what I have to do is I have to have a boundary. And the way I do that is I imagine that there's a plexiglass bubble all the way around me. Mm-hmm. And the things that he says that I know are being hurtful and judgmental, I let them hit that bubble and drop into a bucket that I can look at later to see if it's true or not. Mm-hmm. Okay. But by doing that, I'm able to stay present in the conversation with him without zoning out or saying, oh gosh, here it comes again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's an excellent point. I also think that sometimes people, especially in interpersonal family relationships, people sometimes give us negative feedback to get our goat. They're just trying to push our buttons. And, and sometimes if that's the case, if we react, it gives them ammunition. So, doing something like what Grayson was talking about and imagining a plexiglass barrier can be very, very helpful. So it's a really, I think a lot of this stuff depends on the situation.
And as a family therapist, it's all the way back to when you were 2 or 3 years old, okay? And it's a dynamic that's built up over time.
Right. Any other questions or thoughts about receiving feedback?
Humor.
I have a question written in the chat.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. And then Linda had her hand raised too. Linda, you want to unmute and ask yours first?
Yes.
Yes. My name's Linda. I was just going to say, I think it depends on what is the commitment in the conversation. Is the person speaking common commitment that you've already established? And if you haven't established it, then maybe that needs to be determined first, either discussing it with them or thinking in your mind, what is the commitment? What is our common commitment? What is our ultimate goal in this conversation? I would think that would make a big difference.
I completely.
Maybe they just want to let off steam. Maybe they're having a bad day. I mean, it seems like if someone's just giving you negative feedback and they don't have a common commitment with you, then the feedback is just about them more than it is about you.
Right. And, it goes back to right and wrong reasons to give feedback. Because there's right reasons to give feedback when you genuinely want to help someone get better versus you're having a bad day and your intention isn't necessarily to help somebody, it's to let loose with your frustration. That's true. And in some relationships, especially sibling relationships or teaser bully relationships, there is absolutely no intention to help the other person. You're either trying to get their goat or you're doing some little dance that you've always done with them. So yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very thoughtful way to put it. Yes, I agree.
I'm going to read both of these because I've got to go soon. But from Chase, what if the person asks you to explain your behavior? Then when you try to explain it, you're accused of excusing your own behavior.
Oh, man.
That kind of goes hand in hand with what if we know the criticism is correct and then we feel guilty for yelling or not doing what we should have done? So it's kind of, just how do you handle, I understand that when you try to explain it, you're accused of excusing your own behavior, because that's a common thing we know. And then I think we all feel guilty from time to time about, well, I should have, and the criticism's correct, but you know, as a human being, we're not so nuts about accepting that. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think if we behaved in a way that we then felt bad about, it's important to go back and do some of these things. You know, I really thought about what you said, and you know, I'm sorry I was upset. I was, you know, it's just my initial reaction. I was a bit reactive, but you know, now that I think about it, it's, you know, it's something that what you're saying has some good value to me, and in thinking about how the way it's going. That first one from Chase, that is a tough one. But you know, I wonder to what degree, you know, when someone asks you to explain your behavior, even that point, there's something combative there. Explain your behavior. You know, tell me a little bit about why you did that. Chase, are you talking about someone that just starts talking to you, you know, and there's already a certain amount of hostility in the interaction?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, you got to wonder about the intentions of the person when they confront you and they say, you know, explain, you know, what were you thinking? And yeah, I mean, that sounds like a manipulative way to interact with someone. And it doesn't really, you know, when we think about what do people get out of that? And it's not really feedback. It's, to me, from the way you're describing it, it sounds more like a provocation, a provocation in a way of, you know, pushing your buttons. I don't know. What do other people think about that?
Well, as someone with Asperger's, I have to be proactive because I do things in an unusual way. And I sometimes realize that I have to tell the person my private logic of doing it my way, because my way is not conventional. And to open a conversation with that person and have that person say, oh, I think we can combine your way and my way and come up with an even better way, which then brings the relationship closer.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, in situations where they ask you to explain yourself, and then when you try to explain it, you're accused of, you know, I would question whether there's any validity in even trying to begin to explain yourself. Again, I think it goes back to the person's intention and the quality of the relationship. And if the quality of the relationship is not good, you may not have, I mean, you have no obligation to justify your behavior or explain it. You do what you do.
I hate to butt in, but I have a board meeting starting in just a few minutes. So feel welcome if there are further questions, but I'm going to end the meeting. So it's at least I'm going to stop the recording, I think. And so if you have some questions, if you want to, you know, feel free. I know Dr. Valdez usually answers emails, or if you want to email me with the questions, but this was really, really good. And I heard this 2 years ago, and it's amazing how much I have forgotten, but then a lot of it I've retained too. So talk about a good refresher course. This is it. So y'all please come back to other meetings, share the word. Check us out. We do take memberships. That's part of what helps us keep going. It's $40 for a family or educators, $60 for mental health professionals. And right now, with COVID and all of the events not going in person, we can certainly use your help. And yeah, share the word. These are really good educational meetings that are of value to a lot of different people. So do you have something you'd like to say to wrap up?
But I just want to say one thing before you leave. Hi, Pam. It's good to see you.
I see you. Yes. Nice to see you too. Got some faces I recognize on here.
Yes, no, Pam, I just wanted, wrapping it up, feedback can actually strengthen relationships because knowing that another person is going to tell it to you straight creates and builds trust. And so, when done the right way and with the right intentions, it can lead to good things. So that's pretty much it.
All right. If you did not get her link in the chat for her slides, email me and I can send it on to you. So
They're still there.
much.
I see them at the beginning of the chat. But
Right.
feel free to get that, and my email I think is on there. I think my email and my website are on there.
All righty. Okay, everybody have a nice evening and hope to see you again soon. Everybody take care.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation. I've got a lot of people at 72. I've got a lot of younger therapists I'm mentoring, and I want to get a copy of it to all of them because it really summarizes some really good points on emotional intelligence. And I'm very, it was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
It was fun giving it.
See everybody next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.